scientists, and were able to use them in their individual space and missile research projects and programs for them to be able to give them aid to propel their engines and turbines for them to be able to start exploring more of space in general. And it's also very interesting to know that was during the first stage of the space race, the Russians were actually leading the USA. So the Russians were having their space program in a militarized, in more like of a militarized form. So we were not actually privy to their failings in the process. The only thing that we were able to see were their successes. And that is why, up to date, we are claiming that the Russians at the beginning of the space race were actually leading the fight or leading the race. But we could say, based on the information we have, the statistics we had from the American side, that the USA were actually making great strides, but just that they were not having the right medium or the right channel to which they can be able to create the turbine, the engine, to propel the spaceship and the spacecraft and all. So the first man to actually orbit in space was a Russian cosmonaut. And it is very interesting to also know that whilst they were doing this, their US counterparts wanted to have more collaboration with the Russian counterparts for them to be able to use space as a means to get much more, let's say, secure environment and to also help build humanity in a different perspective. But the Russian counterparts actually refused such an initiative, and that was quite difficult for the USA, because at that time they also had a big failure with one of their rockets falling from the sky and actually creating a lot of mess and chaos in space. And then the first living creature to be sent to space was a dog by name Laika, who was also Russian in all. And again, the Russians are leading in this instance. And I think the main point or the changing point happened in 1961 during John F. Kennedy's speech to Congress about the fact that they want Americans' mission right now to focus on the moon, whereby they want to propel the first man or the first human being to go to space and to land on the moon. And this was what started the Apollo missions, and we got Apollo 11 taking Neil Armstrong to the moon, and he became the first human being to step foot on the moon. From there on, we saw so many other projects in there, because in the process of they trying to get man or a man on the moon, they also try to use the medium of space to gather information for espionage even. We could also talk about the Russian Sputnik project in general, where they try to use their space satellites or their space stations to be spying on most of the Americans and dealings and Americans' military operations from the space in all. So there's even this joke among the researchers who were interviewed after the first trip or first mission of the Russians. They were like, in the operation room, when the station is, let's say the satellite is stationed on the Russian territory, the scientists sleep. But when the satellite moves to the American zone, they are all awake, eyes are open, trying to see if they can see anything that the Americans are doing to give them an intel on what is happening on the American soil. But bear in mind, this was at the era of the Cold War. It was right after the Second World War, and Americans and the Russians are having a clash off. So both sides do not trust each other in terms of security issues, so they want to know what the others are doing and how they want to militarize space security, or let's say satellites, to use against themselves. But it got to a point whereby we saw a couple of leaders, American leaders, who were trying to bridge the gap by creating alliances between the Russians as well as the Americans and the EU by then.